Welcome to the Non-Human and AI Identity podcast. By humans, for humans, no AI-generated content. Hi, I'm Choda, founder of the Non-Human Identity Management Group. On this brand new podcast show, I'll be hosting the leading voices shaping the future of non-human and agentic AI identity. We will also be sharing thought leadership insights from the latest events, including webinars, conferences, summits, and workshops focused on identity management and security. We hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to our Non-Human and AI Identity podcast. I'm excited to have Alon Jackson, CEO and co-founder at AstrixSecurity, join me for this episode. Jackson, please share a brief intro and something interesting about you.
Great to be here, first of all. Thank you, Lalit. Brief intro. So, co-founder and CEO here at Astrix. It's been just over 4 years. Feel like 4 weeks as time goes by. Super exciting to see, how the market evolved, changing from machine identity, non-human identity, now agents kind of taking over, right? Everything. Something interesting. I don't know, Lalit, we go way back years, and I think, as the market evolved and our relationship and you evolved, this is also very exciting to see.
Okay, thanks, Jackson, for the intro. In this episode, I'm actually going to be introducing something quite fun, Mr NHI's human identity in the hot seat. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Jackson, and fire 10 machine speed questions on IAM, non-human and AI identities. All I'm looking for is a simple yes, no answer. All right, so let's get started. Does agentic AI security equal NHI security?
I think it's a subset of.
Okay. Are you a fan of vibe coding?
Of course.
Is IAM for AI more important than AI for IAM?
I think it depends. One of them doesn't exist yet. The other one is, has a solution at least.
Okay. Are organizations putting time to market ahead of security controls for AI agents?
Usually productivity comes before security.
Right. Do you think hackers will be the biggest winners from AI?
No.
Right. Are orgs taking NHI risks seriously enough?
Yes, they are, very much.
Cool. Does Mr NHI post too much on LinkedIn?
Sometimes, but I like it.
Okay. Is the recent market activity involving acquisitions and funding, involving various identity vendors, a good thing for the industry?
It's amazing for the industry. I think there's a big recognition about what we're doing.
Okay. Will the AI agent digital workforce lead to mass unemployment?
On the opposite, I think it will create much more opportunities, but we'll evolve as we always did.
Okay. And then is the Non-Human and AI Identity Show one of the must-listen-to podcasts of 2026?
Obviously.
All right, that was a trick question. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed that little rapid-fire round. Very revealing and a good segue into our main topic today, and hopefully we'll use some of those questions as we go through the session. Okay, so look, in this episode, I'd like to talk to you about the first question I asked. Does agentic AI security equal NHI security? In a recent poll we did, 35% said yes, agentic AI security does equal NHI security, and 65% said no, they are not the same. I think you were leaning more towards the not the same answer. But why don't we start with where you think there's kind of overlap between NHI security and agentic AI security?
Yeah. So, for a yes and no question, obviously it's, black and white, it's no. However, when you look at things as binary, there's human and non-human. So obviously agents do not have a heartbeat, right? They're non-carbon entities. So obviously they fall into the non-human category. However, I think, they're increasingly becoming the most interesting non-human identity type. Obviously, if you ask me, looking at the entire machine identity market, look at the entire non-human identity market, right? Agent identity is where, everything is going. And I think agents in general is becoming a kind of a buzzword that people use, not always in the right context.
Mm,
Conversation I had earlier this month with someone. He built an automation, right? A workflow. He called it an agent. There was nothing agentic about it from my point of view. Nothing AI or LLM in the back end in any sense, right? In terms
mm,
of reasoning and being independent or autonomous, but more of an automation. But however, the word agent kind of replaced maybe the word bot, right? So just from a marketing perspective and the way the market views this and the way we as an industry are going to use the term, agents as a slang, right, on a day-to-day basis, I think in a few years from now, everything's going to be agentic. Now, obviously, applications and services, some of them will stay behind, will have the legacy, will have the stupid services, the traditional applications, which will not become AI and agentic,
mm.
but they will be the minority of them. AI is very much like electricity. It's, in all our software stack, it's everywhere. And it's hard to find a software vendor today that doesn't have, AI on the main web page, on his homepage, right, on the website. So it's really everywhere, and all our services are becoming agentic. So yeah, I think it's hard to decouple NHI and agentic, although they're different. They're hard to decouple, and it will only become more and more, blurred and more agentic as things move forward.
Yeah, look, I fully agree with you that agentic AI kind of agents are a subset of kind of the NHI category, but clearly more complex. So where do you see sort of the commonality? Like, what would be sort of some of the life cycle processes, right, that would be the same, when you're managing, say, an AI agent identity to a standard non-human identity that you would have for a traditional workload or a machine? Where do things, you know, where were they similar? Um,
Yeah. Look, when you look at access and you look at entities, and together they create identities, right? So this entity has access to a system or a resource. Many times you have to go down to the token level, right, to understand, really get into the root cause of what's going on, right? So what's behind that API key? What's behind that service account? What's behind that
mm,
SSH key or certificate or whatever it is? Sometimes it may be, an agentic workload. Sometimes it may be a traditional workload. Sometimes it might be a SaaS vendor. Sometimes it might be an agentic SaaS vendor, right? And many times, actually, you'll find shared secrets. So the same token is being used by a variety. Some of them may be agentic, some of them are not. So I think one of the unique, unfair advantage that we have at Astrix, dealing with these issues for years now, is really going down to the root of the problem and understanding when an identity, right, is maybe transforming, right, because these vendors are obviously keeping up to pace, right, and if they weren't agentic yesterday, it doesn't mean they're not going to be agentic tomorrow. So when these vendors are transforming, when secrets are being shared, where access is being given, right, to different types of non-human identity, agentic or not. And I think it's a journey, right? We as an IT industry have seen a tremendous 2025, and 26 is not going to slow down. In fact, it's going to be even more exciting with goal-driven agents and authoritative agents, and the progress of this space is really tremendous. And this journey is a journey that we're really riding along with our customers and helping them while all their software stack is transforming, right? If you're not able to cover all types of non-human identities, obviously you'll miss, right, in terms of both shadow discovery, but also posture, behavior, anomaly detection, right, and capabilities such as that are obviously imperative in order to really get a grasp on the footprint of agents, right, and the way they evolve inside the organization.
okay, so if I was to summarize kind of the overlap between kind of non-human and sort of AI agents, the core fundamentals for managing those identities, from things like inventory, posture management, security, hygiene, and clearly things like anomaly detection, who has access, what can it do. So clearly those are sort of the core fundamentals that are common to, all NHIs, including, AI agents. But let's maybe then talk a little bit about, why agentic AI security, is different, and more complex than NHI security that we have, for traditional workloads and machines. So, well, what makes things much more complex from an identity management and then security standpoint for AI agents?
Yeah, there's a few aspects that come into this. I think it's best to start with what constitutes an agent. And really for us and what we're advocating for, and we're seeing that the market actually is adopting in terms of the definition of what really makes an agent, and not just a buzzword that you can tag along for any bot that might be built, are basically two fundamental properties. One is having access, right? And two is having intelligence, artificial intelligence in this sense. So if you have an LLM brain, at least one, maybe a few, right? And you have the ability to actually influence, act, you have access to different systems and other applications, right? You're agentic. So if you do not have this kind of access, right, it's more of like a chat, right, that we have that, okay, has intelligence, right? It has a nice LLM module behind it. You can ask it questions. It can consult, right? You in a different aspects, but obviously it cannot act on your behalf, and it's not agentic in that sense. On the other side, if you have a service that can connect and act, right, but is not LLM driven, so it's basically an RPA, right? Robotic process automation, traditional services, they're great. We had them for long. I think we'll still need some of that predictability and rinse and repeat automations. But obviously it's not an agent, right? So combining two of these, you create actually something that's able to be more and more autonomous, right? Reason and actually perform the same action, maybe in a different way because it learned, right, in between executions. And obviously there are levels to it and they're becoming more and more sophisticated, but that's the basic fundamentals, right? So starting from access and behavior and intelligence. So the combination of two of these really is what constitutes an agent. There's a few aspects. I think two of the biggest aspects that we're seeing as very challenging and excited about this. So obviously there's more to lose and more to gain with AI services and agentic identities. One thing is the behavior, because it's not predictable. Understanding, what's the normal baseline, understanding, why is it behaving, what's the goal of this agent, right? Is it being abused, and stuff like that. There's a lot of opportunities to deal with that versus dealing with, human behavior analysis, and obviously very different than, the traditional non-human, which was up until very recently very predictable, right? Or at least much more predictable in many sense. So that's the one side of the house. The second one has the amount of access and permissions that these services are having, are requiring, and that we're giving them. So in fact, one recent survey talked about multiple of 5x more bottom-up adoption than what you've seen in any other technology in the history of IT for the enterprise. Obviously, SaaS was a big revolution. We also dealt with the shadow SaaS, the shadow adoption, the bottom-up adoption of different cloud applications. And this, is 5x times, what we've seen before. I think because, again, of, the amount of productivity and really the board level, not only the bottom up, right, but also the top down board level initiatives of, organizations understanding that if they're not AI native, right, they have to be AI first. And if they're not that, they're basically going to lose the game, be out of business. It's coming from all directions. And this adoption, the speed, I think one of the questions you asked was about productivity versus security, right? Productivity always runs first. We start building trains, and then we figure out the brakes and the belts and the security mechanisms for them.
Okay, fascinating. Let's delve in a little bit more around kind of the autonomous nature of agentic AI agents. Um, Clearly, that puts very different uh, challenges around things like authentication, authorization. You've obviously got different use cases of agents acting on behalf of users, agents that just operate kind of, automatically performing activities for organizations, human in the loop kind of use cases, and then agents to agents. So clearly there's some kind of authentication challenges, and how do you propagate um, activities through that chain of activities that could occur. And then obviously there's you know can you authorize, what could the agent do? Maybe just talk a little bit about those aspects and how you're thinking about that at Astrix.
Yeah, that's a big topic. I think it starts with the access-hungry nature of the agent, like we said before. So we're seeing agents with our customer base, connecting practically everywhere. And obviously, agents connect with other agents. They connect with MCP servers. They connect directly with resources that they want to act on. And they connect in variety of protocols, right? Sometimes it's OIDC, sometimes it's OAuth, sometimes it's via MCP, sometimes it's direct and not via MCP. Many times what actually dictates the authorization, authentication, the actual credential being used and the protocol being used is actually the resource system on the other side, right? So if the only way to connect to this database is through an SSH key that's hasn't been changed or modified for years, that's what it's going to be, and the agent is going to
Mm.
connect, right, using that key. So it's not like the agent's decision many times of how to connect, but rather the agent is connecting to exponentially increasing amount of systems, not only, by the way, for data, but obviously in order to perform operations as well. If it's writing emails on your behalf, writing code, right, transferring money, stuff like that. So one is the variety, right, of protocols and authentication types. The second one is the need to register an agent in a more fixed world where we all dream of, right? But the reality is, we talked about the bottom-up adoption, right? The reality is that when we engage with the customer for the first time, obviously it's already a mess, right? There's a lot going on. So the first thing is really providing a full discovery of what is actually already there, who connected what, when, with what permissions, how's it being used, right? Is it being abused? Is it over permissioned or not, right? Should we allow this to keep getting access to the organization, or should we reduce the attack surface? If by reducing the permissions that it has, or by putting in place a conditional access, IP restrictions, right, and capabilities such that significantly, really significantly reduce the exposure and the attack surface that these identities pose. So it starts from that, and then you can really kind of start, okay, I want to register these types of agents. I want to register all my agents, right? I want to register, agents that have more, permissions than X, right? And others I might want to just revoke, right? And not enable because they were not approved, right? I think approving every connection, every tool, and every agent is too optimistic.
Mm.
It didn't happen we weren't able to do it as an industry. With other technologies, I think with this technology, it's going to be even harder. So I don't think that's the aspiration, and that's kind of where we want to go. But I do think that we want to be able to have a complete visibility and to authorize, right, focus on what matters from the kind of endless map of interconnectivity that we already have and is really increasing daily.
Okay, thanks, Jackson, for those insights. One question, like when you think of agentic AI challenge, what's the thing that kind of worries you the most or keeps you up at night, about how, organizations or yourselves think about, what's coming with agentic AI? Or what concerns you the most?
I think if an agent will come and replace me, I'm kidding. I think what concerns me the most is, the balance between, I think goes back to security and productivity, right? And how are we able to cooperate with, the software stack that exists, right? The processes that exist, the processes that we need to put in place, right? That need to change. Just taking access reviews as an example, right? It's one thing to perform access reviews for humans, but obviously with the millions and millions of agents, it's impossible to perform the same kind of processes, right? In terms of access reviews for agents, we need much more of a just-in-time kind of a mechanism to control the virtual workforce. So really, and that's, I think, our biggest mission, looking into 26, right, is building the fundamentals and the platform that enables organizations to hire, recruit, right, virtual developers, right, virtual employees, and run the full life cycle management of, joining, leaving, right, reducing permissions, changing, ownership, detecting when an agent is behaving like, an insider threat, and needs to be dealt with, and stuff like that. I think that's really top of mind for us at Astrix, and I think for a lot, the majority of the industry these days.
Yeah. The last thing you mentioned about kind of threats, whether it's external or internal, I clearly agree, with agentic AI, given its autonomous nature, you don't know what it may do from day to day. It might then start talking to other agents, other services, create new identities. I think something you said early on around sort of anomaly detection, this I think puts a completely new challenge and what always was a challenging problem anyway, right? To deal with anomalies, outliers, NHIs going rogue by both external and internal threat actors, all the kind of noise, false positives, the volume. Right now, how do you kind of stitch up kind of activity that may be non-deterministic, right? New behaviors occurring day by day across, a chain of different services, agents, endpoints. How are we going to be ready to deal with that side of things and that challenge? And what are you thinking about there?
That's a big piece, I think, of what we excel at Astrix. There's a few things that I would consider as a secret sauce, maybe, not for this platform, but a few things that are maybe a bit more obvious, but not too obvious, I think, are interesting, is really comparing this to traditional non-human identities and to human identities, right? So, looking at human, we wake up in the morning, sometimes we're more energetic, sometimes we're, hungry, sometimes we're angry. And obviously that affects the way we behave. Agents don't have a lot of, that kind of emotional range, maybe, or change. At least, as far as, we're concerned today, but these things might change as well. On the other side, humans jump between sites, they go on vacation, they log in from, remote places, everything to do with the, fingerprinting, user agents, IP, changes and stuff like that, which were, a problem for, the SASE space, the, secure access space, VPNs, right, and things traditionally on the human identity and access front. When you think of an agentic vendor that you have, right? Usually it won't jump in between sites and go on vacation. Like, the vendor has a specific footprint somewhere in the world where it operates from, and if it changes for all of our customers at once, right? So we can really kind of track the behavior and trends. And if an API key gets leaked or a token gets leaked, right, it's easier to detect in terms of an attacker, using this gain sites and sales of drift were just recent examples where serious brands got hit by that. Attackers jumping from Tor nodes, right, from the Tor network and stuff like that, using the same OAuth tokens in that case. So these are just a few examples, right, of where you have pros and cons, dealing with the agentic anomalies and, baselining behaviors. Obviously, there's a bit more that goes into it, even much more, and this will always kind of keep improving and changing as the agents fundamentally themselves, keep improving and changes until maybe they'll be, very similar to humans and surpass us in some aspects. Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, I think this is a good segue to maybe share some perspectives on what you're doing, building Astrix. As you said, you've been around for circa 4 years, obviously started focusing on initially the NHI problem and obviously now expanding that into kind of AI agents. Do you want to just share to the audience kind of, a bit more about AstrixSecurity?
Sure. So the way we fundamentally break, the space is around discovery, secure, and deploy. So we start with the discover, secure, and deploy as a framework. And as I shared before, it's a program, it's a journey that we take our customers on. It's not like a tool. It's really a security program, right? It starts with visibility, then putting down the controls and making sure that they complement each other, right? So the full visibility helps you make sure what controls to put in place. And once you put them, you can see how they're actually being implemented. And if anything goes out of your policy, right, you know about it, right? You can approve it, right? Or, put it under the right governance. So it's really kind of, embracing both sides. Discovery starts with really providing, a good grasp of what's going on in all aspects and all types of environments. So we connect to endpoints. We, look at the agentic browsers these days are a big thing. MCP servers, spinning up on personal endpoints, corporate endpoints. On-prem systems, Active Directory are still everywhere, still very much interconnected to everything. Obviously, cloud, SaaS, right? So really, connecting to whatever is needed in order to stitch together and build a correlation that helps us really, plot the identity graph of what's going on and, how these identities interact with each other, manifest, in different locations. Then the security pillar kind of breaks down into two. It's really the posture and the behavior analysis. I think we talked a bit about the behavior analysis that's very unique to us. The posture also goes very deep, and by the way, they help each other. The posture and the behavior analysis on both sides. So posture is really looking at who connected it, when, what permissions, right? Is it over permissions, as we said? Is this third party? Reputable or not, right? Should we trust it, to perform the operations or get the access that it has? Rotating keys, right? Credentials, and so on and so forth. And the last piece really of deploy is really looking at the control plane, right? So basically, how do we then control these, agents and provide capabilities very similar to what we have for the human identity aspect to these new virtual employees that we're having, in terms of single sign-on for agents, right? Just-in-time access, basic zero trust access. That it's kind of a de facto standard, right? All these technologies and protocols for how employees connect today to enterprises, right? But basically non-humans connect to enterprises in a very wide range of technologies and very much unmonitored, right, ungoverned. So really providing the same kind of capabilities to that stack as well.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think the last point in particular is something I do care about a lot. You mentioned earlier that, unfortunately we still have a lot of static, long-lived credentials that, we just have to deal with, but especially for AI agents, using dynamic ephemeral credentials, using some of the best practices standards, whether it's, OAuth 2, 2.1, OIDC, SPIFFY, SPIRE, like making sure that, we're effectively, authorizing, every time you want to connect with some endpoint, so just in time, given the dynamic nature, right? That's the way the market needs to head. So clearly the old legacy ways of managing NHIs just don't work from an agentic standpoint, just given the risks, right? And then the breadth and access these things will have. Okay, thanks for just sharing. Anything else you wanted to just share, just from a kind of your
No, just
vision
maybe
standpoint? Yeah.
just doubling down on what you said. I think, it's not going to change. It's naive to think that, in one day everything's going to be
Mm.
fixed. Again, taking into consideration the bottom-up nature of this, right, and the developer-first nature of a lot of these technologies. A lot of the protocols exist, right? Things are there, but they won't be just adopted because citizen developers will want to actually build them securely from the get-go. It's hard. It's hard to do in scale, where every employee in the organization is encouraged, right, to connect and use these tools to make him or her more productive on their day-to-day basis. So yeah, I think that's a good point there. In terms of vision and moving forward, I think really becoming the de facto standard for how apps and agents connect to enterprises, similar to what we have, right, for human access, which is really kind of basic today in terms of a single sign-on and providing both the productivity gains from single sign-on, but also the security gains, right, from governing that. That's a must for enterprises. And yeah, the world is going to go there for sure. We're pioneering, everything about it. And we're excited day in, day out, being positioned where we are, dealing with amazing customers and the entire industry, people such as yourself and others, obviously helping us to promote this and bring the future, sooner.
Yeah, no, definitely the future is very exciting. We don't have all the answers yet. As we discussed, it's very complex. If anyone thinks they've got a solution that totally solves the agentic problem, that's not true. I think agentics may be where NHIs were, 3, 4 years ago from a maturity standpoint. We've obviously learned a lot along the way, how to deal with and securing, managing NHIs. So we're much better positioned now. We know all the pitfalls, but yes, the journey to kind of build those enterprise scale platforms, infrastructure to support, the new agentic world, is going to take some time, but good to see your sort of focus on that at Astrix. All right, why don't we jump a little bit to kind of what's going on in the market, right, related to what we just discussed. There's been some crazy, crazy activity in the last few months, in terms of acquisitions from some of the biggest sort of cyber players in the market, sort of acquiring, identity companies, huge investments being made in some of those companies. What are your thoughts on what's happening at the moment in the market? And I know you said it's a good thing. Why do you say that?
Yeah, so we're seeing immense traction, obviously all around. The market is, moving, really kind of getting closer and closer and closer to where we are, which is exciting. Again, basically being in this journey, the difference between focusing on NHI before and after, agents were here. So the agents are here. And this traction that we're seeing is really humbling and exciting for everyone here on the team. Yeah, I think investors are seeing this. Obviously, big companies are seeing this. Customers obviously are feeling the problem day in, day out. I think as in any technology trend, specifically in cybersecurity, of course, there's always waves of consolidation based of breed, and then platformatization of technologies, and it will always be the case, right? When technology runs very, very fast and is being adopted, like we're seeing, the world really is owned by the agile startups who can really be in the right place, the right time, solve for the problems that the customers have today. They cannot wait a few years for things to get integrated or built,
Oh,
right? be solved by their, legacy vendors. That's the opportunity. That's an evergreen opportunity, evolving, right? Evolving, but evergreen opportunity for new cybersecurity startups, right? However, every kind of 5 to 10 years, there's consolidation, trends. Yeah, I think that's part of what we're seeing, in the market today, and it totally makes sense. I think what's exciting about, the IT revolution that we're, as an industry seeing, is that, the pace, right, and the magnitude of the change is something that, I don't know, we haven't experienced for, decades. So, the cycles might be quicker, and the opportunity is leaning more into the favor of, the agile startups who can really keep pace, right, of the new protocols, the new technologies, the new software stack that's being introduced almost on a weekly basis today.
Yeah, look, I totally agree. The pace at the moment is just unprecedented. The acknowledgement that sort of identity security is now the new control plane, and then clearly that's huge investments are now coming. Like valid point you mentioned earlier, yes, it is an arms race, AI arms race. Organizations, if you aren't thinking about how to become leaner, faster, more nimble with kind of the new digital workforce that AI agents will give you, you'll get left behind, right? So it's clearly going to be a massive revolution and I'm glad that we're all on the journey, helping shape some of that future. Look, in closing, what three things in terms of advice would you give to the audience and organizations as they think about their journey around NHIs and AI agents, agentic? What would you share to them?
Yeah. Three things. One is focus on access. If the agent does not have access to the organization, you're going to have millions of them. It's a Pandora's box. Focus with what has the most access. And, and in the bottom, the ones that do not have any access, it might not be needed any attention, right? So prioritize by access and focus on that. The second piece is, focus on behavior, right? So understanding the rationale, the goal, right? The legitimacy, right, of an agent. Calls for deep behavioral analysis, not only for for anomalies, but also just for the baselining of is it over permissions, what's being used, what's not being used, what's consuming it on the other side, right? Who owns it, right? Automatically, things really call for the dynamic nature of understanding the actual behavior of those. So one is focusing on access, two is focusing on behavior, and three is really look at the entire landscape of NHIs. Because as we said, all our vendors are becoming agentic, right? So not looking at our traditional ones and focusing only like on the newer, shinier, ChatGPT, Cursor, right? Agentic platforms themselves is really kind of looking, in a straw on, the agents that we know about, right? But what about the shadow agents that we don't know about? What about, the traditional services that are becoming agentic, that are sharing secrets, with agent resources? And really looking at the entire footprint. By the way, the traditional NHIs are still a big problem. They will still remain a big problem. But the interesting piece on the agentic aspect of it is understanding, how do they help us, build a full picture, right, of our agentic footprint, not only the ones that we knew about, right, but also the ones that we didn't know that, might be agentic or even exist.
Great. Look, I think those are the three great pieces of advice to give to folks and organizations. I think the final one you mentioned is kind of music to my ears. Look, I really do fear, right, that everyone's focused on the new hot, shiny stuff around agentic AI agents. That's what everybody's talking about. But there is a bigger problem out there, which is around the standard workloads, the machines, and most organizations don't have good controls around those. So if your foundations are just managing standard NHIs are pretty weak or non-existent, so say about what's going to happen when you start building agents. We're seeing all the time MCP servers with static credentials. I talked about vibe coding. I asked one of the LLMs, right, to give me some code to connect to ChatGPT API, to a database, to WordPress. and its output was use static credentials hard coded, which was just shocking to see. So yes, focus on the fundamentals, which are just standard good practices, for all IAM. All right, look, Jackson, look, it's been a really enjoyable discussion. Thank you so much for all your insights, what's coming, what you're thinking about around the market and the identity security space more broadly. Thanks for joining the show. Any closing thoughts from you, or how folks and also can find out a little bit more about what you and the team are doing?
Yeah, no, first of all, just resonating what you said. I think what we're hearing from the market as well is that it's basically impossible to build a good agentic program without having strong NHI fundamentals. You're just missing the whole idea of it. And yeah, Astrix.security is where everything is happening. Obviously, reach out if you have any type of identity program, right? Agentic program. We're here. You know where to reach us, and thank you, Lalit, for having me.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. So just in closing, I hope folks enjoyed this episode as much as I did. We've got an amazing lineup of guest speakers coming in the next few months. So please subscribe and enjoy the show. You'll find us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube. Also, visit our portal, nhimg.org, where we have the most comprehensive knowledge center on NHIs, including Agentic, 2,000 articles, blogs, breaches, videos, polls, forums, events, conferences, and even details of some of the products that are sort of tackling the challenges around NHIs and Agentic, including Astrix. And also, finally, if you want to get skilled up, consider looking at our course on NHIs, NHItraining.org. All right, with that, Jackson, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for joining one of the
Thank
first
you, Lalit.
podcast shows, and bye, everyone.